Hello YouTube, Dave here again. Today I want to start a series. I don't know how many videos are actually going to be in this series, but there have been a few times where I've mentioned books that I really didn't like, and there are times I've gone into a little bit of detail, but I don't think I've ever really fully explained why there are certain books that I just say, you don't need this in your collection unless you are a die-hard collector. And so I wanted to sort of take some of those books that I've had really negative feelings about, and there's two purposes to this video. Number one is to really sort of try to demonstrate as best as I can why I thought the book was not very good back in the day. But the other thing is to see if it actually is as bad as I recall. And bad is probably the wrong term, but as, just to see if it's something that I would have the same kind of feelings about now based off of what I look for in, supplement books, for example. So I thought one of the best places to start was with the 3.0 Psionics Handbook. The 3.0 Psionics Handbook is, by a lot of people's, a lot of different discussions that I've heard of, a lot of people view this as one of the most disappointing books that came out for 3rd edition, and that's specifically 3.0. Now, there is a 3.5 expanded Psionics Handbook, which is basically just the updated version of the Psionics system in 3rd edition. You do not need the 3.0 Psionics Handbook to be able to run Psionics using the expanded Psionics Handbook, which is significantly better. And, if there are books where there are those different versions from one edition to the next that, one is just, in my opinion, clearly superior, I will try to do an accompanying video on the better book, for lack of better phrasing, I guess. But today, like I said, I really want to dive into the Psionics Handbook. So this came out in 2001, and this is a book that I have spent very little time with over the course of the last 20 years. I'm recording this in 2021, so it's been roughly 2 decades since this book came out. And when you have that period of time in between, like the last time you really looked into a book or started reading any of it versus, how you feel about it all that time later, it does create a situation where perhaps the negative feelings you have towards it really aren't as bad as you've built them up to be in your own head over that long a period of time. So, like I said, Psionics Handbook was one that, this is actually a book that I didn't have in my collection until just a few years ago. I borrowed it back when it first came out from a friend of mine, and in 2018, I think, 2018, maybe 2019, I bought a copy of it off of a different friend who was moving away from where his house was. I think he ended up moving out of province actually, and was just looking to shrink his collection. Sent me a list of what he had, what he's willing to part with, and gave me the right of first refusal on anything. So this was one of the books that I didn't have. I wasn't super keen on it, but I got it for a pretty good deal. I think I paid 20 bucks for it, which is a price I would only pay from a friend. If this was something that I was looking for in like a game store, for example, I probably wouldn't go any higher than $15 really. But like I said, one of the things I want to determine is Psionics in 3.0 really as bad as I remember it? And the best way to compare it is to compare it with the other spellcasting classes, because Psionics in 3.0 was really all about manifesting powers and using them in combat, sort of the same way that like a wizard would cast spells, or a cleric or druid or sorcerer. So those are sort of the ones that you would compare it against. So let's just sort of get right into it, shall we? I'm not going to flip through the entire book in this video. There's only really a couple things that I really want to focus on in terms of trying to either prove my theory from all that time ago or disprove it. So we're going to take a look at the Psion here. So this is 3rd edition. So there's a few things to sort of, keep note of. If you're someone who's only really played like 5th edition, for example, there are going to be some pretty serious differences. So for example, you've got your base attack bonus. So this would be, the number that you would add in addition to, specific ability modifiers and, things like that to determine if you hit or miss something. You had three different levels of progression. You had the fighters or the warriors progression, which your base attack bonus started at +1 and just went up by 1 every single level. Then you had the clerics or the priests and the rogues progression, which was essentially, I think it went up like 2 every 3 levels sort of thing. So you would start at like +0 and you get like +1, and then I think you go to +2, and then there would be sort of like you'd have +2 for a couple of levels. And I can't remember the exact progression, but basically your 20th level attack progression was like your highest attack was at +15. For a fighter warrior class, it was +20. And for wizards and sorcerers, it was your highest attack bonus at 20th level was +10. So it was like 1 every 2. It's sort of similar to how like THAC0 progressed in 2nd edition, but we're not going to talk about that here. So the Scion is sort of the closest equivalent to the Scion would have to be the Wizard. I'm not going to go through all the classes because the mechanics I think are the same for regardless of what the class is. But so here we have the Scion. So the Scion has the Wizard's attack progression, so they start with only +0 at first level, and they don't get +2 on attack rolls until 4th level. They only get +10 as a maximum by 20th level, and specifically at 20th level. Their saving throw progression is the same as the wizard, so their fortitude and reflex are considered to be their weak saves, and their will is considered to be their best save. Beyond that, you've got your powers. They have, there's like 9 levels of powers plus like 0 level powers. And you can gain access to certain ones, as you progress in level, similar to how like a wizard gains more access to more powerful spells as they progress. And then we have our bonus points, power points. So this doesn't use spell slots like a wizard does, for example. Sonic characters have a pool of psionic power points, and they can gain extra points based off of their charisma score. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. So, it worked similarly in, the other spellcasting classes. So, for example, clerics and druids could gain extra spell slots based on their wisdom score. And wizards could get extra spell slots based on their intelligence score, and sorcerers could get an extra spell slots based off their charisma. So I guess maybe sorcerer is a better analog for the Scion than perhaps the wizard. But so it was charisma. So your charisma is what you use to determine your bonus power points. So that's pretty simple and straightforward. But here's where we start to get into a little bit of the problems with 3.0 psionics. So in 3.0, your psionics, you have 6 different disciplines. So we got psychometabolism, psychoportation, psychokinesis, metacreativity, clairsentience. I know I'm pronouncing that wrong, but it's like 1 o'clock in the morning when I'm recording this, so I don't care. And telepathy. So each one is based off of a different attribute. So strength, dexterity, constitution, intelligence, wisdom, and charisma. So this is where things already diverge from the traditional spellcasters that we had with the player's handbook, for example. With a sorcerer, for example, everything regarding their spellcasting is based off their charisma. So this, the maximum level of spell they can cast is equal to their charisma. So, for example, you have to have a 10 plus plus the spell level to be able to cast a spell. So a sorcerer wanting to cast a 9th level spell would need to have a 19 charisma. That's not the way it works for the psionic disciplines unless it's telepathy, because telepathy is actually tied to charisma. The other ones, though, are tied, like I said, to the different attributes. So to manifest a power from a specific discipline, you have to have a key ability score of 10 plus the power's level, but the key ability score is the one associated with the discipline. So even though your power points is based off of your charisma, so it says it here specifically your charisma, and that's how many extra points you get to be able to cast spells. Your ability to cast is tied to whatever attribute is associated with the discipline that you are following. So that creates a situation where you are now splitting your attributes to where you're putting your 2 highest ones into whatever your associated ability is based on your discipline. And then you also have to look at your charisma because you want those extra points. So you're, like I said, you're kind of splitting your focus, which means like you could be, for example, if you want to use some psychometabolism abilities, or be an egoist, then you would need a decent strength for the ability to cast high enough high enough powers of those powers based off of that discipline. But strength really isn't super useful overall to a scion because strength is primarily used for physical, like melee attacks, but your attack bonus is so low that again it's kind of wasted, right? Because you're never going to get more than plus 10 for the base, and you're going to be outclassed pretty quickly in attack bonus by every other character in the party, save for like a wizard or sorcerer. So you had to sort of split your focus there. Now the other problem, and this is the big one, this is like the really big problem. So difficulty class, so DCs for saving throws against like powers in this case. So again, relating it to spells, relating it to the sorcerer, the DC to successfully save against a sorcerer spell is equal to 10 plus the spell level plus the sorcerer's charisma modifier, because again, it's all wrapped up in charisma for all of their spell casting stuff. So 10 is the base number, which is a base number for, just essentially like whenever there's a base number for something. In 3rd edition, it was 10. So armor class, for example, you start with 10 and then you add on to it. And with DCs, it's the same thing. You started with 10 and then you added your spell level plus your attribute modifier. With the psionics in 3.0, it says the DC for saving throws to resist a scion's powers is 1d20 plus the powers level plus the scion's key ability modifier. So, it's variable, and that sucks. It really sucks, because it means anytime you manifested a power and you were relying on a creature failing their saving throw, there was a gamble as to what that DC was going to be. The option to take 10 doesn't exist unless it's provided through like a feat that you could possibly take. But, if you're relying on something and you have to roll to set the DC and you roll like a 1 or a 2, then that's it. Like, it's very unlikely that it's going to, that they're going to fail at that point. There is the chance, obviously, that you could roll higher. There's a 50% chance that you could roll higher, but there's also a 45% chance that you're going to roll lower. And I really don't like those odds. And that was one of the big things. I believe, I really want to say that the only time someone ever made a psionic character, they went with a psychic warrior, specifically so that they wouldn't have to bother with saving throws, because they would only take powers that would augment their own abilities. So they would never bother casting something targeted at an enemy, because they didn't want to risk rolling low to set the DC. So yeah, it just that was the absolute deal breaker. And until I looked through this book again just before recording this video, I had completely forgotten that. The only thing that I remember is like, well, you needed multiple different attributes based off of the different disciplines of the powers, and it was just sort of a mess. And when we get to the powers themselves, you can see that they say what the attribute is that they're associated with. At first, I thought it meant that it had to be the same, like you base it off of whatever your attribute was. I don't think that's 100% completely and totally the case, because it does say, where we're here, so the D20 plus the Scion's key ability modifier. So I think it's the Scion's, not the powers key ability. But anyway, it was still bad. Like, it was still, like I said, you were sort of splitting your focus, and the whole variable DC by having to roll it, I remember that being a huge deal breaker. And I want to say that's honestly when I closed the book and just called my friend and said, hey, listen, I'm not interested in this, so I'm going to bring it with me, in the next game, and, but I'm not interested in it. Because I think he lent it to me to see if I would be interested in, like, maybe buying it, not from him, but just buying it and maybe using it in my campaigns, but I decided against that. The other big issue when it comes to psionic powers is, let's get to the actual psionic powers here. So the psionic powers don't actually scale in level. The only thing that really is level dependent for like 3.0 psionics is your durations. So again, to relate it to a sorcerer, for example, in 3.0, so a sorcerer or any spellcaster, really, even like paladins and rangers, their spells would get more powerful as they progressed in levels. Pretty much any spell that had some sort of numerical component to it would improve based on your level, even if you're using the same level spell slot to cast it, because back then you didn't memorize, like, heal or cure wounds, for example, and then just use whatever spell slot level you wanted to cast it. You would actually be like, okay, well, my first level spells, I want, cure light wounds, or for sorcerer, it's like I want 2 magic missiles, a mage armor, and so you'd actually have to do so. Sorcerers actually cast spontaneously. I guess wizards would be the one for that. But the point is that you would use that first level spell slot, and if you cast that first level spell using that first level spell slot at first level, it did one thing, and then when you cast it again using a first level spell slot, but you were second level, it got more powerful. So for example, going to a cleric for this one, cure light wounds would heal 1d8 plus your level up to a maximum of +5. So at first level, you would heal 1d8 plus 1 using a first level spell slot. And at second level, it would be 1d8 plus 2 using that same first level spell slot. With psionics here, what you actually had was the abilities did the exact same thing. It never improved. Now, in 3.5, most of your abilities would have the ability to, or most of your powers would have the ability to spend extra points into them to increase their effects. It's sort of the equivalent of using like a higher level spell slot in 5th edition. So for example, like a wizard could cast magic missile using a first level spell slot, and that's fine. But they could also choose to cast magic missile using a second level spell slot if they had it. With 3.0 psionics, you have your first level powers that will always be the same. They will never change in terms of what you can do with them or what their numerical effects are. They never scale. The only way to improve them would be to take like an improved or greater version of the same ability, but that would be a higher level. That'd be a higher level power. So, for example, you might have one at first level that has some sort of like again minor effects, but that will never change. If you want the more powerful version of it, then you have to choose like the improved version, which could be at like 3rd, 4th, or 5th level or whatever. So it really made first level or low level abilities super weak because they just never got better. Magic Missile in 3rd edition, for example, you got extra missiles every other level up until you reached like 9th level and you had 5 missiles. So even at higher levels, being able to automatically deal 5d4 plus 5 damage wasn't the worst thing in the world. But for example, having a first level psionic ability that does 1d6 and always does 1d6, and if it allows a saving throw and you roll a 1 on your saving throw, it means you spent that power point and basically for nothing. So those were the biggest issues when it came to 3.0 psionics. It was the way that they had the disciplines and the different attributes based on the different disciplines, and using the different attributes for the save DC as well as the maximum level of power, but determining your bonus points off of specifically your charisma. Honestly, if they would have had all of them, like the power points and the saves and your like maximum level available, based off of the same thing, and have that dependent on your discipline, that would have been a lot better. It still would have been the greatest, but it would have been a lot better. And just fixing the whole rolling a d20 to set the DC, because man, I don't want to take, the 45% chance versus 50% chance that will be, better than average, right? Or worse than average. And again, the fact that the abilities just always did the same thing. So for example, you've got Finger of Fire. It's only a 0 level ability, so that might not be the best one. But like it does a D3 and will always do a D3. So if there was like a first level version that did a D6 or even 2D6, it's always just gonna do 2D6. So, and again, you've got your saves, which you set the DC for. It's just a mess. So those are the reasons why 3.0 Psionics was just not particularly good. And like I said, I always wanted to try to explain that, hopefully a little bit better, and I hope comparing it to the way that spellcasters worked, to show you the clear differences between the two. I hope that sort of makes things a little bit better, because I know I've mentioned before that like 3.0 Psionics was bad, and I've heard other people also say that 3.0 Psionics was bad, but there's not a lot of situations where I found people really going into more detail as to why. So like I said, I wanted to sort of do that with this video. And for the purposes of this one, like I said, there might be some books where I look back on it 20 years later and think to myself, you know what, that's not as bad as I remember it. This is not one of those books, as I found out, because I completely forgot about rolling a d20 to set your DC. And it's just like that alone makes it so much worse. So I think, like I said, they had a pretty interesting foundation. And, I will say that they definitely tried to make Psionics more playable in 3rd edition than it was in like the AD&D days, because I think there was a whole, I think it was, from what I understand, because I have no firsthand experience with it, and I've never really read into it or looked into it because I just couldn't be bothered. But from what I've heard of AD&D Psionics was that it was a cluster to try to get through. So I do appreciate the fact that they did make something that is somewhat playable. Like they, and having like the classes with the progressions and stuff like that, was definitely a step in the right direction. The problem is that they should have modeled it just 100% off of the way that they did other spellcasters. And when it came to 3.5, when I do my look at 3.5 Psionics, which I'm hoping to do probably like next week or maybe later in this week, we'll see. But you'll see that they definitely changed the way that they did that, because it was all like there was no more disciplines having different attributes. It was just sort of more like schools of magic for wizards, where it just determined which ones you had access to, basically. But yeah, 3.0 Psionics was, it was a good first attempt that never should have seen print. I mean, to be honest, it never should have actually made it to production. I think that they had sort of a foundation to build on, but instead of building a foundation, they just sold it as like a chest-high wall, basically. So yeah, so 3.0 Psionics. So there you go. That's sort of my look at why it's just, not very good. I do not recommend getting the 3.0 Psionics Handbook unless you can get it for a very good price, or you're like a very dedicated collector. And, that's the only reason that I have it. I was just like, well, I didn't have this one, and I had the expanded one, and I thought it might be kind of cool to do a video comparing the two. Which it took me a few years to get to it, but I guess we're going to start that process now. But yeah, if you're looking to get into 3rd edition and 3.5, there's nothing wrong with that. I think it's it's still a very well received system overall, especially 3.5. But if you're looking to get into 3rd edition, 3.5, or whatever, and you want more options, and you see the Psionics Handbook, if this is what it looks like, don't pick it up unless you want to give it a shot. I mean, if the idea of variable DCs is something that appeals to you, if the concept of having requiring multiple decent attributes to determine how high level and how many times you can manifest your powers, then that's fine. If you're okay with stuff just not progressing with you, and having to like drop the lower level versions to get a higher level version, which is going to cost you more points to manifest. And anyway, yeah, 3.0 Psionics, a very interesting concept, a good first attempt. And if it would have stayed internal and then they just developed it further and ended with what they had with the Expanded Psionics Handbook, would have been awesome. But as it stands, this is something that it's more of a curiosity. It's an interesting read if you want to sort of see the thought process and sort of see the progression. Maybe it might be interesting, but in terms of actual playability, I don't think it was particularly well done. And like I said, I've seen a lot of people sort of put the Expanded Psionics Handbook on their lists of like worst or most disappointing third edition D&D books. And I don't really know anyone that has super fond memories of 3.0 Psionics. So if you're someone that's watching this and you loved 3.0 Psionics, feel free to let me know in the comments and let me know what some of your experiences were with it, what you liked about the system and why you enjoyed it. Because, I would really love to sort of get someone else's opinion or get a different opinion, because the consensus is sort of, unfortunately, pretty skewed on the it's not very good side. And again, it's also a bit of a shame because, Bruce Cordell, he's a great author. He's done a lot of, great, books and adventures. And, I really like, most of his stuff, but this one is just a swing and a miss, So there you go. Hope you enjoyed this video. Like I said, I really kind of like the idea of going back and trying to see if some of these books that I didn't like are as bad as I remember. And unfortunately, this one was. Hopefully there'll be ones that aren't, because I'd love to think that maybe over 20 years my stance may soften on certain things. This wasn't one of them, but I do want to thank everyone for taking time to watch this video. I know I haven't been uploading a ton lately. I'm still sort of struggling with headaches and everything, and that's maybe why this video isn't quite. I'm hoping this video turned out all right, because yeah, I've been dealing with that for the last few weeks actually. But today was sort of a bit of an annoying day with it, and the day before was pretty rough as well. But anyway, so yeah, thank you guys very much for watching. Hope you enjoyed. Let me know what your thoughts are on 3.0 Psionics. And like I said, I'll try to have the Expanded Psionics Handbook video come out in a week or so, or even just a few days. We'll see what I'm up to, how I'm feeling when the time comes. But anyway, again, thank you guys very much for watching. I appreciate all your support. It really does mean a lot to me, and I'll see you next time. Take care.